Airships were once seen as the future of long-distance travel, but when that bubble burst, the technology was largely abandoned. Railroads also went through a bubble that wiped out investors across Britain. Yet, years later, the industry grew 3 times larger than even the bubble had promised, and became the backbone of modern economy. So, which path will AI follow? Will it become another airship, another railroad, or something else entirely? Turns out, there's a surprisingly simple way to understand technology bubbles. It all comes down to 3 clocks. And once you see how they interact, you will never look at bubbles the same way again. In the early 1900s, airships seemed unstoppable. They could carry heavy payloads and cross oceans without runways, and they were very fuel efficient. During World War I, they even carried out some of the first bombing campaigns in history. This started an arms race, with Germany, Britain, and the US competing to build larger and more capable fleets. But airships had a fundamental problem. To stay afloat, they had to be incredibly large, yet incredibly light. That meant delicate aluminum frames wrapped in fabric that were vulnerable to storms and difficult to land. What's worse, helium was prohibitively expensive, so many airships were filled with hydrogen, which is extremely flammable. Not surprisingly, there were many deadly accidents, like the famous Hindenburg disaster that killed 36 people. Now, around this time, another technology kept getting better: the airplanes. They could fly faster, higher, further, safer, and they could carry more passengers. So there was little reason to keep investing in airships. Today, airships are only used in a few niche applications, like advertising, surveillance, and tourism. It failed because the underlying technology never became good enough. This is the capability clock. It stopped for the airship, but kept running for the airplane. But better capability alone isn't enough to guarantee success. Take the Concorde. When it first debuted in 1976, it could fly from London to New York in under 3.5 hours, about half of the time of conventional airliners. Many believed supersonic flight was the future of air travel. Airlines around the world placed options to purchase more than 100 Concordes. But the excitement didn't last, because the Concorde burned enormous amounts of fuel, carried relatively few passengers, and required expensive maintenance. On top of that, many countries banned it because breaking the sound barrier creates sonic booms powerful enough to rattle people's homes. That left the Concorde with only a handful of profitable routes. And even on those routes, only wealthy people could afford tickets. Meanwhile, Boeing built the 747. It wasn't nearly as fast, but it could carry hundreds of people at once, which dramatically lowered the cost per seat. Airlines quickly realized where the real money was, moving millions of regular people, not a handful of wealthy ones. Today, almost every Concorde sits in a museum. It was one of the most capable aircraft ever built, but it failed because the economics just didn't make sense. This is the profitability clock, and it never moved much for the Concorde. But even when something is both capable and profitable, it can still crash spectacularly. Railroads certainly had both. By the mid-1800s, trains were already carrying freight and passengers across vast distances at speeds never seen before, and they cost roughly 90% less than boats or wagons. Yet, it became one of the most devastating bubbles in history. What happened? The problem is that before a railroad company could earn a single dollar, it first had to buy land, level hills, build bridges, lay miles of track, and purchase locomotives. Then it had to wait years, sometimes decades, for towns, businesses, and passengers to grow around those routes. The profits would come eventually, but investors wanted them immediately. As the hype spread, newspapers claimed the railroads would make everyone rich. Many people even borrowed money to buy railroad shares, convinced they couldn't lose. At the peak of the bubble, railroad companies accounted for roughly half of all capital raised on the London Stock Exchange. Then, reality caught up. Lenders demanded repayment, Investors rushed for exits. More than 200 companies went bankrupt. Many people lost their life savings. But because the technology was fundamentally capable and profitable, the railroads themselves didn't disappear. The companies that survived bought them at a fraction of their original value. As more towns, factories, and passengers appeared over the following decades, the railroad industry not only recovered, it grew larger than ever before. This is the adoption clock. It was going as fast as it could for the railroads. But that's still too slow for the initial investors. The same pattern played out during the dot-com bubble. Telecom companies laid far more cables than demand could justify. When the bubble burst, many companies went bankrupt, leaving an estimated 85% to 95% of cables unused. But as internet adoption caught up over the following years, the same cables became the foundation of the global information economy. So where does AI stand today? Let's look at what the evidence actually says about our 3 clocks, because it's not as obvious as you think. Quick disclaimer, this video is for education and entertainment only. It's not financial advice. When people debate whether AI is overhyped, they usually focus on what it can or cannot do today. But investors aren't paying for today's capabilities. They're betting on its capability years from now. And there's a real case that it could get better faster than most people expect. Just a few years ago, AI could barely write simple code. Today, it can build complex applications in a single prompt. It's also becoming much better at code verification and debugging, which used to be one of its biggest weaknesses. Many coders I know spend far less time writing code manually these days. Instead, they're defining requirements, making architectural decisions, and polishing the final product. AI has also advanced quickly in math. In early 2026, researchers showed that large language models had reached fellowship-level performance on the Putnam competition, one of the most prestigious undergraduate math exams in North America. Just 2 years earlier, people didn't think that would happen until 2033. Then, OpenAI announced that one of its internal models had helped disprove a long-standing conjecture in discrete geometry that had remained open for decades. So AI's progress in the past 5 years is undeniable, especially in coding and math. This is partly because these fields have well-defined logics and formulas that are easier to verify. A piece of code either runs or doesn't run. Whether that progress will continue or translate to messier domains like science, medicine, business is a much harder question. In fact, there are already reasons to think progress could slow. Scaling laws have begun to flatten. High-quality training data is becoming harder to find. Generating new data takes time. Many of the easiest progress may have already been achieved. Meanwhile, even today's best models still hallucinate, delete files they weren't supposed to, and failed at long chains of reasoning. Some researchers argue these aren't just engineering problems. They are fundamental limitations of the current LLM architecture. That's why researchers like Yann LeCun believe the next major leap won't come from making language models bigger, but from entirely new architectures like the JEPA. But that will likely take years to develop too. So does that mean LLMs may eventually become another airship, a promising technology heading towards a dead end? Possibly, but a dead end for LLMs wouldn't necessarily be a dead end for AI. It depends on how we define AI. Is AI just LLMs, or is it all machine learning? Personally, I think it's somewhere in between. It should be any machine learning systems that can utilize the current compute and data infrastructure. That could be LLMs, another neural network architecture, or something we haven't invented yet. We've also barely begun exploring what LLMs can do when they're embedded inside specialized tools rather than just chatbots. These tools and harnesses have already shown to be capable in coding. More just need to be created for other domains. So the capability clock isn't moving at a steady pace. It's racing ahead in some areas while slowing in others. And it may even stall for years before the next breakthrough arrives. But even if AI continues to advance faster than expected, that doesn't mean it will be profitable. Now, when people hear profitable, they usually think the profitability of AI companies, like OpenAI or Anthropic. That's important, and we'll get to that later. But an even more important question is whether using AI is profitable. Because if businesses don't save more money than they spent, they won't keep paying for AI. Earlier this year, Microsoft told thousands of its own engineers to stop using Claude Code and switch to a cheaper internal tool. And Uber burned through its entire 2026 AI budget in just 4 months. These are supposed to be the biggest customers of AI, and even they are saying it's too expensive. We've also seen many companies switching back to humans. Klarna made headlines in 2024 when its CEO claimed an AI chatbot was doing the work of 700 customer service agents. But by mid-2025, the company began hiring humans again, admitting they had gone too far. So why does this keep happening? Because while AI can reduce costs in some parts of a job, it can also create new costs in other parts. See, in low-stake tasks like stock image generation or SEO blog writing, mistakes are usually cheap and easy to fix. But in fields like customer service, law, medicine, finance, or engineering, even a small mistake can wipe out the cost savings. Or worse, drive away an important customer. Also, for coding specifically, there's a lot of concerns that AI-generated code will be hard to maintain. The accumulated technical debt might end up costing more later. And if engineers stop reading code, they may become less effective at debugging complex issues or designing new systems in the future. There's another complication. Today's AI is probably cheaper than it should be. OpenAI's own leaked financials show that it's losing more than $2 for every dollar it brings in. We don't know Anthropic's numbers, but it's likely similar. So once AI companies pass the true cost to customers, what seems profitable today may no longer be profitable tomorrow. That said, costs usually fall when technology gets better. In fact, inference costs have already dropped by roughly 1,000 times over the past few years. And recently, researchers at Tufts published a neurosymbolic approach that could lower it by another 100 times. So AI could become profitable in at least some industries as it becomes more efficient. But even if AI usage becomes profitable across every industry, that still doesn't mean society will adopt it overnight. This might be the clock investors underestimate the most. At first glance, AI looks like the fastest adopted technology in history. Within just 3 years, more than half the population had used it. Much faster than personal computers, the internet, or even smartphones. But there's a big difference between superficial adoption and integrated adoption. Buying a ChatGPT subscription is easy. Actually using it to do productive work is much harder. This exact problem happened to computers. A restaurant could have a computer sitting in the back office for years without changing how servers took orders. It wasn't until the 2010s that computers became smaller, wireless, inexpensive, and paired with specialized software before they fundamentally changed how restaurants operated. Financial analysts, on the other hand, adopted spreadsheets almost immediately in the 1980s. Same technology, two industries, 30 years apart. This gap puzzled economists so much that they gave it a name: the productivity paradox. It was inspired by the Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Solow's famous observation. You can see the computer age everywhere but in the productivity statistics. AI will likely follow a similar pattern. Some businesses will adopt it rapidly, others may take decades. Not because AI isn't capable or profitable, but because organizations need time to redesign workflows, reorganize data, retrain employees, rebuild hardware, rewrite software, and integrate AI into thousands of existing systems. That's just the business side. Public sentiment matters too. And so far, it seems that the more people adopt AI, the more resistance it generates. Workers find using AI stressful. Users distrust AI-generated content. Artists object to their work being used for training. Health experts have raised concerns about AI sycophancy and AI psychosis. Communities are increasingly pushing back against new data centers over electricity and water consumption. I mean, why wouldn't they? You have tech CEOs boasting that AI will replace all of our jobs, all the while raising our utility bills. Not surprisingly, many cities are advancing legislation to ban data center construction. Many countries are passing policies to regulate AI in the workplace and media too. All of this may slow adoption further. But even if all three clocks eventually catch up, investors may not be willing to wait that long. And that's ultimately what determines whether we get a gentle correction or a spectacular crash. To be fair, today's investors are probably more cautious than they were during the dot-com bubble. More people are openly questioning AI valuations. More analysts are paying attention to actual demand and costs. But the scale of investment is still extraordinary. In 2026 alone, big tech companies are expected to spend roughly $725 billion on AI infrastructure, up more than 75% from the year before. Analysts expect that figure to exceed $1 trillion in 2027. Never before has so much capital flowed into a new technology in such a short amount of time. But not all capital is equally patient. Some come from sovereign wealth funds and other long-term investors. They can afford to wait a decade or more. But much of it comes from public companies, venture capital, banks, and everyday shareholders. Those investors don't always expect full returns in just a few years, but they do expect some signs of a profitable operation. Plus, an increasing share of investment is being financed through circular financing, private credit, and special purpose vehicles, which intensifies the urgency for meaningful returns. That brings us to the biggest question of all. Can AI companies generate enough profits to justify the current investment? Let's look at the most optimistic claim. In May, Anthropic was set to more than double its quarterly revenue, which would be its first ever operating profit, around $500 million. That's a real milestone. But there are caveats. It's an operating profit, which excludes things like stock-based compensation. And it covers a single quarter where some of its biggest computing costs hadn't fully kicked in yet. Anthropic itself has said it may not stay profitable for the rest of the year as spending rises. OpenAI faces an even bigger challenge. The company is losing billions of dollars each year, and it announced plans to spend over $1 trillion on future infrastructure. Even its own projection doesn't expect positive cash flow until 2030. And then there are other forces that can sway things either way. Chinese models and open source models are becoming just as capable in many tasks, and they are much cheaper to run. This will likely start an ongoing price war, making it harder for any one company to keep a high profit margin. Still, inference costs could continue to fall, new tools could attract new customers, and governments may decide AI is strategically important enough to support regardless of short-term profitability. No one knows for sure which forces will dominate, but when we put everything together, a broad pattern emerges. The capability clock is still advancing, although unevenly. The profitability clock has started in some industries, but not others. The adoption clock may take years or even decades as organizations and society gradually reorganize around the technology. Meanwhile, a large share of investors will likely want some returns long before these three clocks have fully caught up. So some kinds of correction over the next few years is more likely than not. Whether that's a modest pullback, a dot-com level crash, or somewhere in between is anyone's guess. But even if the market crashes, that still wouldn't answer the question we started with. Will AI itself, not just LLMs, but the broader technology, ultimately follow the path of the airship, the Concorde, or the railroad? Well, I actually think the answer is none of the above, because there's another historical analogy that fits even better: electricity. Unlike railroads or airships, electricity wasn't a single invention with a single purpose. It was a platform, a foundation upon which countless other technology could be built. And that meant there weren't just one investment boom, there were many. Early speculations centered on utility infrastructure. Later came streetcars, factory machinery, refrigerator, radio, TV. Even Nikola Tesla lived through multiple cycles. Some of his inventions, like the AC induction motor, became foundational to the modern electrical grid. Others, like the Wardenclyffe Tower, collapsed because the economics just didn't work. And some technologies built on top of electricity became entirely new platforms themselves: computers, the internet, the cloud infrastructure. Each created its own waves of optimism, speculation, crashes, and eventually real transformation. AI may simply be the next platform in the chain. If that's true, then today's AI boom probably wouldn't be the last one. Some AI companies will fail, others will become enormously successful. New tools and applications will continue to emerge. Some may even pave the way for entirely new industries. Of course, nobody knows exactly how this story will continue. History doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. The bigger question isn't whether AI changes the world. I think it almost certainly will. The real question is how it changes the world. Right now, much of the conversation is centered on replacing human labor as quickly as possible. I think that's the wrong goal. The most transformative technologies in history didn't simply eliminate people. They unlocked entirely new ways for people to discover, create, and solve problems together. If AI follows that path, it has the potential to create far more value for society. And unlike the stock market, that's a future we can influence. If you enjoyed this video, you might also like my videos on why AI adoption has historically been much slower than people expected, and why AI may create more jobs than it replaces in the long run. And if you're interested in more technical side of AI, I have an entire playlist for that too. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.